It started on a quiet Monday morning at Riverside High, the kind of morning where nothing unusual ever happened. Students dragged themselves into the building, half awake, half wishing they were still at home. Among them walked a girl who most people hardly noticed. She moved softly, almost like she didn't want to take up space. Slipping through the crowded hallway, with her head slightly lowered and her backpack hanging loosely off one shoulder, her name was Lena. And to almost everyone in the school, she was simply that quiet girl who kept to herself. She wasn't loud, she didn't hang out in big groups, and she never tried to get attention. She sat in the middle row during class, did her work, and left without drawing a single pair of eyes toward her. Some students didn't even realize she'd been in their class until halfway through the year, even though she'd never bothered anyone. Her silence made her an easy target for whispers and jokes. Not cruel ones, just the careless kind that people throw around without thinking. She never talks, some would say. Probably scared of her own shadow. Others thought she was strange because she never tried to be like everyone else. But Lena didn't take it personally. She just kept moving, kept trying to blend in, wishing people would stop paying attention to the little things that made her different. That Monday morning, something new appeared on the school bulletin board. A bright, colorful poster with glitter around the edges and bold letters across the front. Annual talent show, sign up now. A cluster of students gathered around it, joking and nudging each other about who should join. Some bragged about their dance routines, others about singing or magic tricks. A group of boys argued about who would win this year, while a group of girls planned matching outfits and rehearsals after school. Lena walked past the poster at first, not thinking much of it. Talent shows were for kids who loved the spotlight, the ones who felt comfortable being watched by dozens of eyes. She wasn't one of them. She preferred quiet corners, music in her headphones, and afternoons spent alone where nobody expected anything from her. But that day, something tugged at her. She stood a few steps away from the poster and slowly turned back. Her heart thumped a little faster, though she didn't understand why. Students continued signing their names and chatting excitedly. Completely unaware of her presence behind them, she hesitated for a long moment, the way someone might stand at the edge of a cold swimming pool, unsure if they should jump. Finally, she took a breath, stepped forward, and picked up the pen sitting at the bottom of the sign-up sheet. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote her name. The pen felt heavier than it should have, and her letters came out small, neat, and a little crooked. She didn't add a description of what she planned to do. There was a space for that, but she left it blank. After her name was written, she quickly placed the pen back and walked away. Pretending she hadn't done anything unusual, she didn't notice the two students nearby who watched her write her name. One of them nudged the other with a surprised look. "Did she just sign up?" He whispered, "No way. Maybe she thought it was like a permission form or something. Or maybe someone dared her." They laughed quietly, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. Lena was the last person they expected to join something as public as a talent show. By lunchtime, the rumor had already started spreading. People looked at her more than usual, not in a mean way, but with the kind of surprised curiosity that makes someone feel out of place. A few students whispered as she passed by their table. Others looked at her like they were trying to figure out if it really was her name on the sheet. "Do you think she's actually going to do it?" one girl asked. "Maybe she's going to juggle textbooks," another joked. No, maybe she'll just stand there and stare at the audience." Lena heard some of it, but she didn't react. She kept her eyes on her food and focused on eating quietly in her usual corner of the cafeteria. Her stomach twisted a little, not because of the jokes, but because the reality of what she'd done was sinking in. The talent show sign-up wasn't a mistake. She'd done it on purpose. It wasn't for attention. In fact, the last thing she wanted was more eyes on her. But she also knew she'd reached a point where hiding all the time didn't feel right anymore. There was something she loved more than silence, more than blending in, more than the comfort of going unnoticed. Music. Most people didn't know this about her. They didn't know that each day after school, she rushed home, dropped her bag at the door, and went into the small room that once belonged to her grandmother. They didn't know she practiced for hours, repeating the same passages until she could play them without thinking. They didn't know the walls of her home were filled with the sound of strings, soft at first, then stronger as she grew more confident. The violin wasn't just a hobby. It was her world. Her grandmother had taught her when she was little, guiding her tiny hands over the strings, showing her how music could speak louder than words. When her grandmother passed, the violin became a way to keep her close a piece of love she could still hear. Lena never told anyone because she wasn't sure if she was good enough. Playing at home was one thing. Playing in front of people felt like stepping into a storm without an umbrella. But she had reached a point where she wondered if maybe it was time to stop hiding in the shadows her whole life. By the end of the school day, the whispers had grown louder. Some students passed by her locker, staring a little too long. A few even smiled awkwardly, like they didn't know what to say. Others giggled in disbelief. One boy muttered, "This is going to be funny." Another shrugged. "Maybe she'll back out." But Lena kept her expression calm. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, and she didn't plan to give one. The moment she made the decision to sign up, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough for her to keep going. As she walked home that afternoon, the air felt different, lighter somehow. She carried her violin case tightly in her hand, its handle worn from years of use. The streets were quiet, and the sound of her footsteps mixed with the distant noise of cars. When she got home, she opened the door, stepped inside, and placed her violin case carefully on the table. Her mother was in the kitchen sorting through groceries. She looked up with a warm smile. "You're home early," her mother said. "Yeah," Lena replied softly. Her mother gave her a curious look. "Something on your mind?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Signed up for the school talent show." Her mother paused, surprised, but not in a bad way. Her eyes softened. "Really?" Lena nodded again, this time more firmly. Her mother walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think that's wonderful." Lena couldn't tell if she felt relieved or nervous, maybe both. She sat on the couch and opened the violin case. The familiar smell of polished wood drifted out. She lifted the instrument, feeling the smooth curves under her fingers. She didn't start practicing right away. Instead, she just held it close, as if gathering courage from something that had always been her safe place. The talent show was only 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prove not to others, but to herself that she could stand in front of people and still be whole. That night, she practiced longer than usual. Not because she wanted perfection, but because she wanted to feel steady, grounded. The notes filled the room gently at first, then stronger, warmer, more full of life. Her mother stood in the hallway, listening quietly, her eyes shining with pride. Meanwhile, back at school, her name on the sign-up sheet continued to spark conversations. "Do you think she'll actually show up? I swear this is going to be the weirdest performance ever. Maybe she does have a talent." Who knows? The truth was, nobody knew. Nobody had ever asked. Nobody had ever cared enough to wonder, but they were about to, because Lena, the quiet girl who slipped through hallways unnoticed, had just taken the first step toward something none of them expected, and soon everyone would see a part of her she had kept hidden for years, a part that spoke louder than whispers, louder than doubts, louder than every assumption people made about her. She didn't know exactly how things would turn out. She didn't know if she would shake on stage, if the audience would stay quiet, or if she would manage to play every note perfectly. But she knew one thing clearly: she wanted to try. And for someone who spent most of her life staying small, the decision to try was already a big step that night. As she carefully placed her violin back in its case, she whispered softly to herself, almost like a promise she needed to hear out loud, "I can do this." She didn't need the world to believe it, not yet. It was enough that she believed it for the first time, and that belief was the beginning of everything that would follow, the days after. Lena signed up for the talent show felt strange, almost like the world around her had shifted just a little. Nothing big changed on the outside. The halls were still crowded and loud, teachers still rushed through lessons, and students still laughed and talked like always. But for Lena, the air felt different. Every time someone glanced her way, she wondered if they were thinking about the talent show. Every time someone whispered near her locker, she wasn't sure if it was about her. She tried her best not to overthink it, but it was hard. When people weren't used to seeing you, Suddenly being noticed felt like standing under a bright light with no place to hide. She kept her head down and walked to class like she usually did, tending not to hear the half-formed comments or confused questions. But while the school buzzed with gossip, Lena had something else on her mind. She had a secret one she protected carefully, like a treasure she didn't want to expose to the world too soon. Her music was the one thing she had always kept private, something she shared only with her grandmother and in small ways with her mother. It was a piece of her heart she wasn't ready to let people judge or misunderstand. Yet now she had made a promise to herself, and she wanted to keep it. Every day after school, she walked home quickly, eager to get inside before the afternoon noise of the neighborhood grew louder. Her house wasn't big, but it was warm in a quiet way. The walls were filled with framed photos, some of her grandmother when she was younger, some of Lena before she grew into the shy girl she was now. Her home smelled faintly of old books and something like lavender, a scent her grandmother loved. The small room where Lena practiced was tucked away near the back. It had one window that let in soft sunlight during the afternoon. The wallpaper was old and slightly faded, patterned with tiny flowers her grandmother once said reminded her of childhood. The violin case sat on a low wooden table, where Lena had left it the day before. She sat down, opened the case, and lifted the violin. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar comfort of its weight. Her bow rested against her fingers like an extension of her hand. She closed her eyes for a moment before playing the first note, soft at first, gentle, a single sound that floated in the quiet room. Then she played another, and another. Soon the room filled with music, warm and full, filling the spaces where silence used to live. She didn't think about the talent show. She didn't think about school or whispers or curious glances. When she played, none of that mattered. It was just her and the violin, the world slowing down around her. Her grandmother used to tell her, "Music is the voice your heart uses when words don't work." Lena remembered those words every time she felt nervous or unsure. If she thought too much, her hands would shake. But when she focused on the sound, when she let the music speak instead of her thoughts, everything felt steady. Her mother stood in the doorway, smiling softly as she watched her daughter practice. She didn't interrupt. She never did. She knew this was Lena's space, her safe corner of the world. Every day that week followed the same pattern. School was full of small stares and whispers, but home was filled with music. Lena practiced different parts of the piece she wanted to play at the talent show. It was a melody her grandmother composed years ago, something she had passed down to Lena like a secret gift. Sometimes Lena struggled. Sometimes her fingers slipped, or a note came out harsher than she wanted. She would stop, breathe, and try again. She never rushed it. She wanted the piece to feel right, not perfect, just honest. But even as she practiced, something felt heavy in her chest, a worry she couldn't shake. She wasn't afraid of playing poorly. She wasn't afraid of making mistakes. She was afraid of being seen. People at school didn't know her. They only knew the version of her they created in their heads, the quiet girl, the odd one, the one who didn't talk. She knew some of them judged her without meaning to. Others didn't notice her at all. But the moment she stepped on that stage, they would all see her. The thought made her stomach twist. One afternoon, as she packed up her violin case, her mother walked into the room. "You're practicing beautifully," her mother said. Sitting beside her on the small couch, Lena shrugged lightly. "I don't know. I keep messing up in the middle part. That's normal," her mother replied gently. "Even the best artists practice the parts they struggle with. What matters is that you keep going." Lena played with the corner of the violin cloth, unsure how to put her feelings into words. "Are you nervous about the show?" her mother asked. Lena nodded slowly. "I don't know what people will think." Her mother thought for a moment. Then she said, "People will always think something, but what matters most is what you feel. If this is something you want to do, then you should do it for yourself, not for the opinions of people who don't know your heart." Lena let those words sink in. They eased the pressure just a little. Her mother had always been good at saying the right things at the right time. The next day at school was slightly better. Even though people still whispered, the noise around the talent show started to include other students too. Everyone was focused on rehearsals, costume ideas, and what performances would stand out. Lena wasn't the center of attention anymore, and she was relieved after lunch. She headed to the music room to practice during her free period. The room was mostly empty, except for one student who played piano softly in the corner. Lena chose a spot near the window and quietly took out her violin. She didn't play loudly. She didn't want to draw attention. But the moment she began, the piano player stopped, listening. The music drifted through the room in soft waves. Lena didn't realize she had an audience. It's not until the pianist suddenly spoke. "That's really good," he said. Sounding surprised, she froze mid-note. "Oh, sorry," he added quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you." Lena nodded politely and lowered her violin. She kept her voice small. "It's okay. You practicing for the show?" He asked. She hesitated before giving a tiny nod. He smiled in an encouraging way, not a mocking one. "Well, you're going to surprise a lot of people." She didn't know how to respond to that, but the comment made her feel something warm, something like a small spark of confidence. They didn't talk much after that. Lena wasn't used to casual conversations, especially with people she didn't know well. But when she played again, she felt lighter. And when she left the music room, she felt just a little braver. As the talent show drew closer, the school filled with rehearsals. Students practiced in hallways, classrooms, and open spaces outside. Some laughed loudly as they messed up dance moves. Others argued about song choices or who would stand where. Teachers tried their best to manage the chaos. Lena kept to herself. She practiced quietly in any free space she could find. Sometimes she played in the stairwell when it was empty. Other times, she went behind the library, where almost no one walked. A few times, students walked by and stared. One girl tilted her head and whispered, "I didn't know she played anything." Another boy shrugged and said, "Maybe she's better than we think." Those comments used to make Lena nervous, but now, for some reason, they didn't bother her as much. She still felt shy, but something inside her was changing a slow, careful shift. On the Friday before the talent show, the school held a short rehearsal where students checked the stage, the sound system, and seating. When Lena stepped inside the auditorium, she felt her heart pound hard against her chest. The stage looked bigger than she remembered. The rows of chairs seemed endless. She tightened her grip on her violin case. A teacher called her name gently. "You'll be performing after the dance group," she said. "Just wait in the wings until your turn." Lena nodded, though her palms had grown damp. She stepped onto the stage for a quick sound check. The lights weren't fully on, but even the soft glow felt intimidating. She lifted her violin and played a few notes. The sound echoed across the empty room. It felt strange hearing her private music in such a big space, but it also felt exciting. The teacher gave her an approving smile. "Sounds lovely," she said, as Lena left the stage. She felt a flutter in her chest, not fear exactly, but something close to hope. When she got home that afternoon, she walked straight to her practice room. She placed the violin under her chin and played the full piece without stopping. The music flowed out of her, smooth and strong. Her mother listened from the hallway, her eyes soft with pride. When Lena finished, she lowered her violin slowly. She didn't smile, but there was a calmness in her expression. She was still nervous. She still worried about stepping in front of her entire school, but she also felt something deeper, something steady. She felt ready. The night before the talent show, she placed her violin back in its case with extra care. She wiped the bow gently, straightened the cloth, and closed the lid carefully. She ran her hand over the top of the case. "Just like her grandmother used to," she whispered softly. "I hope I make you proud." The house was quiet. The world felt still. Tomorrow, we step on a stage where people would finally see her, not the version they guessed, not the quiet shadow they overlooked, but the girl she truly was, a girl who had kept her heart hidden inside music for years, a girl who was finally ready to play her first note for the world. The morning of the talent show arrived with a strange mix of excitement and nerves floating through the air at Riverside High. Even the hallways felt different. Students walked a little faster, talked a little louder, and gathered in small groups to discuss who they thought would win. who had the best performance planned, and what surprises might happen. Lena walked through the front doors with her violin case held tightly in her hand. Her heart beat a little faster than usual, but she kept her face calm. She wasn't used to big events. She wasn't used to eyes turning toward her. She had always been part of the quiet background of the school, and she had been comfortable like that. But today was different. She headed straight to her first class, hoping to avoid attention. Normally, she could blend in easily, but today, a few students noticed her almost immediately. It wasn't because she looked different as she wore the same quiet style she always did, but because everyone knew the talent show was happening today. A couple of students glanced at the violin case in her hand. One whispered to another, though Lena couldn't hear what they said. Another girl gave her a curious look. It's almost like she was trying to figure out if the rumors were true. Lena sat down in her usual seat, trying to steady her breathing. She placed the violin case carefully beside her desk, as if even the desk wasn't sturdy enough to hold something so important. She stared at the clock, wishing time would slow down, even though she also wished to get the show over with, as class began. Her teacher spoke normally, but the students were distracted. Even the teacher knew it. He paused a moment and said, "I know the talent show is happening today, and everyone is excited. Just try your best to stay focused, all right?" A few students laughed. Some nodded half-heartedly. Lena kept her eyes on her notebook. Pretending to write even though her mind drifted far from the classroom, she thought about her grandmother. She thought about the music she had practiced for hours. She thought about how different she would feel standing in front of an audience instead of the quiet comfort of her practice room. But most of all, she thought about those first few seconds on stage, the moment before she started playing. That moment felt like a huge storm cloud hanging over her head. What if she froze? What if her hands shook? What if the sound came out wrong? What if people laughed? She squeezed her hands together under the desk, trying to calm herself. When the bell finally rang, she walked to her next class in a daze, barely hearing the chatter around her. Students were buzzing about the show. "I heard the dance team added a new trick. Someone said the singers are doing a duet this year. Do you think anyone will mess up?" Lena kept walking, keeping her eyes low. But then she heard a voice say, "Do you think that quiet girl is really performing?" She didn't turn around. She just kept walking. Part of her felt nervous, but another part felt strangely calm. She had already made her choice. She signed up. She practiced. She prepared. There was no going back now. At lunch, she sat at her usual corner table with her violin case beside her. She didn't eat much. Her stomach felt tight, like it didn't have space for food. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table, creating a soft rhythm without her noticing. Students walked past, talking excitedly. A few looked in her direction, not in a harsh way, but in a curious, uncertain one. One boy, holding his tray, slowed down as he saw her. He tilted his head and said quietly, "Good luck later." He didn't wait for a response. He kept walking. Lena stared at her tray, unsure how to feel. Encouragement wasn't something she received often from classmates. It felt strange but also comforting. After lunch, the school made an announcement through the speakers. The talent show would begin right after the last class. Students who were performing were told to go early to the auditorium for final preparations. Lena's heart pounded at the words, but she nodded silently to herself. She gathered her things, placed her violin strap across her shoulder, and headed toward the auditorium. The backstage area was alive with noise. Students talked loudly, laughed, adjusted costumes, and practiced dance steps in small open areas. Someone tuned a guitar in the corner. A group rehearsed a song quietly near the back wall. The energy felt loud and chaotic. Lena stepped inside, her movements small and careful. She didn't want to be in the way. She found a quiet spot behind a curtain and placed her violin case on the floor. A teacher organizing the event noticed her and walked over with a warm smile. "You're here early. That's good. We'll start lining up soon. You're the fourth act." Fourth. That meant she wouldn't have much time to prepare mentally. It also meant she would have to wait just long enough for her nerves to grow. "Thank you," Lena said softly. She sat down on a small bench near the edge of the stage. She opened her violin case slowly, almost reverently. She checked the strings, tightened the bow, and touched the polished wood gently. The violin felt steady in her hands, like a friend who never judged her. She played a few warm-up notes, barely loud enough to be heard over the backstage chatter. The sound calmed her a little. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. As the clock ticked closer to showtime, the auditorium filled with students, teachers, and a few parents. The excited chatter from the audience echoed through the walls. Backstage students peeked through the curtains, trying to see how many people had shown up. "It's full," one girl whispered in shock. "There are so many people." Lena didn't look. She couldn't. If she saw the crowd, her nerves might take over completely. A teacher clapped their hands loudly. "Everyone, quiet down. We're starting in 1 minute." The noise dropped slightly, replaced by whispers and the shuffling of feet. Lena felt her pulse quicken. The host walked on stage as the lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The host welcomed everyone with a cheerful voice that echoed through the auditorium. The first acta, comedy skit went out with loud enthusiasm. It wasn't perfect, but the audience laughed and enjoyed it. Next was a dance group. They sparkled under the lights, moving in perfect rhythm. The crowd cheered. Then a student performed a magic trick. The audience clapped politely, a few amazed gasps rising when he pulled off something surprising. Lena breathed in slowly. She was next. Her hands grew cold as she wiped her palms on her skirt. She lifted her violin carefully, adjusting the strap over her shoulder. A teacher approached and whispered, "You're up. Just walk to the center and take your time. You'll do great." Lena nodded, even though her heart was racing. The stagehand lifted the curtain slightly. "Ready?" he whispered. She swallowed hard. Yes, the applause from the previous act faded. Her name was announced. She stepped forward. Her legs felt stiff, as if they weren't completely under her control. The stage lights were bright, much brighter than she expected. For a moment, she almost stopped walking. The room felt wide and overwhelming, but she forced herself to keep going. One step at a time. She reached the center of the stage, the violin in her trembling hands. She lifted her eyes for just a second. The audience was huge. So many faces, so many eyes. She didn't recognize most of them. They all seemed to be staring right at her. A few whispers floated through the crowd. "Is that her? I didn't know she played anything. What's she doing up there?" Her heart pounded so loudly she felt it in her throat. Her fingers trembled so much she almost dropped the bow. For a moment, the fear nearly swallowed her. She could feel it cold, heavy. Pulling her backward, she remembered all the times people overlooked her. All the whispers, all the doubts that had followed her for years. She remembered walking through the halls unseen, unheard. But then she remembered her grandmother's voice, "Play like your heart is speaking." Then her mother's voice, "What matters is what you." Feel her breath, steadied. She lifted her violin to her shoulder. The room was silent, waiting. She placed the bow on the strings. One note, just one note. She only needed to begin. She closed her eyes, and she played the first note. It floated gently at first, then grew stronger, richer, fuller. The sound spread across the auditorium, soft yet powerful. The audience grew still, almost stunned by the unexpected beauty of it. The whispers stopped. The shuffling stopped. Even the coughs stopped. All that remained was the sound of her violin. She opened her eyes slowly. The lights still felt bright, but somehow they didn't bother her as much now. Her fingers stopped trembling. Her body relaxed into the music. She moved the bow with smooth, practiced motions. The melody flowed from her instrument like a quiet story she had been keeping inside for years. She played the piece. Her grandmother composed the one filled with gentle rises and emotional dips, the one that made her feel connected to something bigger than herself. As she played, the audience listened with full attention. Some tilted their heads. Some leaned forward in their seats. A few even looked moved, their expressions softening with each note. Lena didn't look at any one face. She looked somewhere above the audience, letting the music guide her. She let her emotions pour into the sound, her years of silence, her loneliness, her fear, her hope, her love for her grandmother, her desire to be understood. The piece reached its most emotional moment, and Lena felt her chest tighten, not from fear this time, but from the depth of the music. She felt free in a way she had never felt at school before. When she played the final note, it lingered in the air for a long, delicate moment, then silence. Not because the performance was bad, not because the audience didn't care, but because they were stunned. Then, applause. A wave of clapping rose through the auditorium like a sudden burst of warm air. Loud, growing louder, filling the entire room. Some students stood. Others cheered. Even teachers clapped with genuine smiles. Lena stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. She had never heard applause directed at her before. She wasn't sure how to react. She lowered her violin slowly and gave a small, shy bow. The applause grew even louder. She felt her eyes. The auditorium felt colder than the hallway outside. Even though bright lights hung over the stage, she could feel the heat from them on her face as she walked toward the center. But inside, her chest felt tight, almost frozen. Her steps sounded too loud on the wooden floor, and she wondered if the whole room could hear how her shoes tapped unevenly because her legs were shaking. She kept her violin case close to her chest the whole time, almost like she was holding on to something alive. It was the one thing that made her feel safe tonight, even more than her own breath. She tried not to look at the audience, but her eyes kept catching glimpses of faces, rows and rows of students, teachers and parents waiting for her to start. Some were whispering. Some were smiling in a way that didn't feel friendly. Some were leaning back like they were expecting a joke. She took a deep breath, but it came out shaky. For a moment, she wished she could turn around and walk off. No one would stop her. Most people probably expected her to run anyway. But then she remembered her grandmother's voice from years ago. Gentle but firm, telling her, "You don't have to be loud to be strong. You just have to let your heart speak." She set her violin case on the small stool beside her and opened the latches one by one. The clicks echoed more than she expected, and each sound made the room quiet down even more. She tried to focus only on her hands, not on the dozens of eyes staring at her. She lifted the violin carefully, holding it like something precious. She brushed her thumb across the smooth wood, and in that small touch, she felt a little steadier. This violin had been with her through every late-night practice, through every moment when she needed a place to hide, through every happy memory she still held close. Tonight, it needed her just as much as she needed it. The microphone in front of her picked up. Even the faint scrape of her bow as she adjusted it. A few students giggled in the back row. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She already knew they expected her to stumble or freeze or make a fool of herself. She could feel the weight of their doubt pressing against her. But then something strange happened. A memory floated up, soft and warm, like a hand resting gently on her shoulder. She remembered sitting on the floor of her grandmother's tiny living room, where the sun always seemed to fall in bright golden squares. She remembered how her grandmother's hands guided hers on the bow, slow and patient. She remembered how she had told her, "The first note is the hardest. After that, the music helps you." That memory wrapped around her like a blanket, and her breathing slowed. She lifted her violin under her chin, feeling the familiar weight settle into place. She positioned her fingers on the strings, her movements slow but sure. She closed her eyes for just a second, blocking out the room, the whispers, the pressure, just long enough to say silently to herself, "I can do this." The room was completely still now. Even the giggling had stopped. She didn't know if that made it better or worse. All she knew was that every sound in the space waited for her next move. She drew in one final breath, let the bow fall. The first note rose into the air, smooth and full. It didn't sound shaky or weak. It didn't waver the way she feared it would. It came out rich, almost glowing, like it had been waiting inside her for this exact moment. The sound filled the whole room, reaching the ceiling, the walls. The seats in the back where the kids with their phones had stopped recording. People who had been leaning casually in their chairs sat up straighter. A couple of teachers exchanged surprised looks. Someone in the front row lowered the program they had been reading. Another student stopped whispering mid-sentence. No one was laughing anymore. She didn't see any of this, though. She didn't need to. She could feel the room change. It was like the air got warmer, like something invisible had shifted. For the first time that night, she wasn't scared. The music was guiding her now, just like her grandmother had said it would. Her bow moved with a confidence she didn't know she still had left in her. Every note felt like a step forward, like she was walking out of a shell she had lived in for too long. The piece she played wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't meant to impress with speed or skill. It was a slow, emotional melody her grandmother had created, one she had taught her with such care. The song told a story without any words. A story of someone finding strength after loss, of someone learning to trust themselves again. It carried feelings she had never been able to say out loud. Tonight, the violin was saying them for her. The lights above her made her eyes glisten, but she didn't blink them away. She let the emotion guide her, pouring everything she had into the music. Her fingers moved on their own now, remembering every note her grandmother had taught her. Every small correction during long afternoons of practice, she felt free for the first time in a long while. Near the back of the auditorium, someone slowly lowered their phone. Not because the recording was done, but because they had forgotten they were even holding it. Another student rested their hands on their knees, eyes wide. A pair of teachers whispered something to each other, something that sounded like, "I had no idea." The sound filled every corner of the room. And she didn't need to look to know that everyone had stopped talking. They were listening. Really listening. Not because they had to, because the music made them. She shifted into the middle section of the song. The melody grew deeper and more emotional. The bow glided faster now, but not in a frantic way, more like the feeling of running into someone's arms after being apart for too long. The notes wrapped around each other, rising and falling like waves. It was a piece that carried joy, sadness, hope, and memory all at once. Her hands no longer trembled. Her breathing was steady. She had forgotten all about the stage, the lights, the pressure. It was just her and the violin. And somewhere inside the music, she felt like her grandmother was there too, guiding her bow the way she had when she was younger. By the time she moved into the final section, the room was completely silent. She had never heard a crowd so quiet before. Even during rehearsals, there was always someone whispering or shuffling or tapping a pencil. But now, all she could hear was the music and the soft sound of her own breath. The final notes were soft, almost like a whisper. She let them float into the air, letting them fade slowly. When the last note drifted into silence, she held her position for a moment, bow still raised. Not wanting to break the spell too soon, when she finally lowered her violin, she opened her eyes. Every person in the audience was looking at her, not with the amusement or doubt she had seen before, but with something else, something she wasn't used to. It looked like respect, maybe even admiration. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She waited, and then the room erupted. Chairs scraped back. Hands clapped together. People stood up. Some students cheered loudly, and a few teachers wiped at their eyes before joining the applause. The sound washed over her like a wave, and she felt her chest tighten with emotion. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the quiet girl people overlooked or whispered about in hallways. She wasn't someone they expected to fail. Tonight, she was someone who had shown them a part of herself they had never bothered to see. She looked down at her violin, letting her fingers rest on the wood. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. Her grandmother had been right. The first note was the hardest after that. The music truly had helped her. When the applause finally began to fade, she didn't move right away. She stood in the same place on the stage, her violin still held carefully in her hands, as if she was afraid the moment would disappear if she so much as blinked. The sound of everyone clapping for her felt unreal. It was like standing in warm sunlight after living in shadows for years. She let herself breathe slowly, taking in everything. When she stepped off the stage, she expected the feeling in her legs to wobble again from nerves, but they didn't. She felt steady. More steady than she had felt all week, maybe all year. It was as if playing that song had opened something inside her, something she didn't even know she had locked away. As she walked behind the curtain, she heard soft footsteps rushing toward her. Before she could turn, she felt arms wrap around her. It was her mother. She hadn't even realized her mother had moved backstage. She hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you," in a voice full of emotion. Her mother's hands were warm and trembling a little, but her embrace was strong. She didn't say much back. Words felt too small for what her heart was feeling. She simply nodded and held on for a moment before pulling back. Her mother brushed a hand gently across her cheek. "Your grandmother would have been so happy to hear you play that piece," she said. She would have said, "You played it better than she ever could." Hearing that made a lump rise in her throat, and she looked down at her violin again, trying not to cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry on stage. She wasn't on stage anymore, but she still wanted to keep that promise. Before she could answer, she heard more footsteps. Students were coming toward her, some slowly, some with energy, some with looks that were a mix of surprise and something like admiration. A girl from her math class stepped forward first, a girl who had barely spoken to her all year. She said, "Hey." That was amazing, in a soft voice. Her tone wasn't fake or forced. It sounded real. She nodded shyly. "Thank you." Another student, someone she had once overheard laughing about her signing up for the show, looked down awkwardly and said, "I didn't know you could play like that." "I mean, that was really good." She simply replied, "Thanks," not holding any bitterness. Tonight wasn't about proving anyone wrong, even if it felt like she had. Slowly, more students gathered around her, offering kind words. Some simply smiled. A few teachers joined too. Her music teacher, who had never heard her play solo before, said, "You should have joined the advanced group months ago." That was extraordinary. She blushed a little and looked down at her shoes. Compliments always felt strange to her, but tonight they didn't feel overwhelming. They felt earned. Someone asked her where she learned to play that way. Someone else said they had recorded the whole thing and wanted to post it online. She didn't know how to respond to all of it at once, so she mostly listened quietly. But her mother stepped in gently and said, "Let's give her a little space." She just came off stage. People smiled and nodded, offering her one last great job before heading back toward their seats or the lobby. When the crowd finally thinned, she and her mother walked out of the backstage area together. Her violin case felt lighter than usual as she carried it. It was strange how the instrument seemed to grow. Heavier when she was nervous and lighter when she felt strong. The hallway outside the auditorium was buzzing with chatter. Parents were greeting their children. Students were laughing and discussing the performances. Teachers stood in small groups talking quietly. When she and her mother stepped into the hallway, a few people turned toward her and smiled. A couple of parents even offered compliments, saying things like, "That piece was beautiful, and you have real talent." She wasn't used to being noticed like this. But instead of shrinking away, she held her violin case a little tighter and nodded politely. Her mother looked at her with a proud smile. "Let's go home," she said. "I think you need some rest after tonight." But before they reached the exit, someone called out her name from behind. She turned to see her music teacher hurrying toward her. "Do you have a moment?" the teacher asked. She nodded. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," the teacher said, smiling warmly. "I think you're ready for the advanced youth orchestra in the city. They're taking new applicants next month, and with your skill, I believe you'd be a perfect fit." Her breath caught a little. She had heard of that orchestra before. It was well known and hard to get into. The idea of even trying felt big, almost scary. But then she remembered how she felt on stage tonight, how the music had carried her instead of her carrying it. She looked at her mother. Her mother's smile widened with encouragement. "I think you should try," her mother said softly. Her music teacher continued, "You'll need a short recording of a solo, and I can help you prepare. If you're willing, I'll support you every step of the way." She swallowed and nodded slowly. "I'd like that," she said. Her teacher smiled. "Wonderful. I'll send the details tomorrow." After the teacher left, she and her mother finally stepped outside. The night air was cool and refreshing, brushing gently against her face. She hadn't realized how warm the auditorium had been until now. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. They walked together toward their car. The parking lot lights cast long shadows on the ground, and the night sky above them was quiet and peaceful. Her mother unlocked the car, but before she got inside, she stopped and looked up at the sky. Her mother came around to her side and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I'm just thinking about what?" her mother asked. "Everything," she said softly. "Tonight, the song Grandma. The way everyone looked at me. It feels strange." Her mother leaned against the car beside her. Strange good or strange bad? She thought about it for a moment. Strange good, she admitted. Her mother smiled. "It's okay to feel that. You stepped out of a comfort zone tonight? That kind of thing changes people." She took another breath and then got into the car. Her mother started the engine, and they drove home quietly. The radio played softly in the background, but she barely heard it. Her mind kept drifting back to the moment she played the first note. How the room had fallen silent. How the music had wrapped around her like a warm embrace. When they reached home, she went straight to her room. She placed her violin case on her bed and opened it carefully. She traced her fingers along the wooden surface of the violin, feeling grateful for everything it had given her tonight. She sat on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes. She imagined her grandmother sitting beside her the way she used to, smiling gently. She imagined her saying, "See? I told you your heart knows how to speak." The thought filled her with warmth. Later that night, she lay down, thinking about everything that might come next. The youth orchestra. More performances. More people listening. And yet, none of that scared her the way it might have before, for the first time in a long time. Her future didn't look blurry or frightening. It looked open, possible. The next morning when she woke up, sunlight filtered through her curtains. It felt like a new beginning. She got out of bed, washed her face, and tied her hair back before sitting down at her small desk. Her violin sat there waiting. She picked it up slowly, feeling a familiar comfort in her hands. She tightened the bow and rested the instrument under her chin. She played the first note of her grandmother's piece again. It wasn't as loud as last night or as emotional, but it still carried meaning, and then she played the second note, and the third. The music flowed gently, filling her room the same way it had filled the auditorium. As she played, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She knew there would be challenges ahead. Additions, new people, new expectations. But she also knew she had already done something she never thought she could. She had stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and shared a piece of her heart. That alone meant she could face whatever came next. When she finished playing, she lowered her violin and let out a slow breath. She wasn't the girl who everyone ignored anymore. She wasn't just the quiet one sitting in the back of the classroom. She was someone who had found her voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Anymore, as she packed her violin back into its case, she smiled to herself. She felt ready for the future. Ready for new challenges. Ready for new performances. Ready to let her music speak wherever she went. Tonight, she had proven something important, not just to the audience, not just to her classmates, but to herself. She wasn't invisible. She never had been. She had simply needed the right moment to shine. And now that she had, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop shining anytime soon.